Montana Territory, 1878. The wind was dry and bitter the morning Beatrice Talley was dragged by her wrist to the cellar door of her father's house, her voice hoarse from shouting truths no one wanted to hear. "You shame this family with your mouth," her stepfather hissed, slamming the heavy door shut over her protests. The lock clanged into place. Above her, the light vanished. Below, darkness and the smell of earth swallowed her. Beatrice crouched in the corner, arms wrapped tight around her ribs. Her cheek was bruised from where he struck her. But worse was the taste of silence forced on her again. She had only spoken what the town whispered behind closed doors. That the sheriff took bribes. That a saloon girl had gone missing after accusing a rancher of hurt. That her stepfather, Harland, was no better than the men he drank with. For that, they locked her in the dirt. She did not cry. She had done that at 15 when her mother died and left her with a man who only cared for control. Now, at 23, she was done with tears. Time passed, hours, perhaps a day. They brought no food. Just a bucket of water, lowered by rope without a word. Then, one night, wind howled against the house. Rain began to pound, and somewhere above her a voice. "Hold on," it said low and steady. A man's voice. "I am going to get you out." Beatrice froze. Wood creaked. Metal scraped. The lock rattled. Then crack. The door broke open, splinters flying. A man dropped into view, lantern in hand. He had wild dark hair under a wet hat, mud on his boots, and something hard in his eyes. But when he saw her, crouched and blinking like a broken thing, his whole face softened. "Run," he whispered, tossing off his coat and wrapping it around her shoulders. Now, while they are still passed out, she stared at him. "Who are you?" "August Cade. I was riding through when I heard what they did to you. I could not leave you in there." She hesitated only a second more, then took his hand. Together, they ran. They slipped through the side yard, past the chicken coop and broken fence line. She stumbled twice, barefoot and weak, but August never let go. His hand stayed firm around hers, warm even in the rain. They reached his horse tied behind a cluster of fir trees. He helped her up and climbed behind her, pressing her close to his chest, shielding her from the storm. "Where are we going?" she asked, breathless. "North. I have a cabin a few hours out. You will be safe there." Beatrice pressed her face into his coat. She did not know him, not really, but his voice had steadied her in the dark. And he had broken a door for her. That counted. They rode hard through the night, the storm chasing them across the plains. By the time they reached the cabin, dawn was breaking pale gold over the hills. August lifted her down gently. "You are safe now." The cabin was small but strong. He lit a fire and warmed her by it, draping a blanket around her shoulders. She sat close, hands out to the heat, eyes still wide. He brewed coffee and poured her a tin cup. She stared at it for a long moment. "You do not owe me anything," he said quietly, crouching beside her. "Not a word. Not an explanation. I just could not leave you there." Her voice was rough. "I spoke up. About what they did to others. What they were hiding. That is all." August nodded. "Then you were braver than the rest of them." For a moment, silence. Then her hand reached for the coffee. She sipped and coughed. August grinned. "Too strong." She nodded once, but her mouth twitched at the corner. He did not press her with questions, did not ask what she saw or how long she had suffered. He simply gave her space and heat and quiet. And for the first time in years, Beatrice felt something like peace. 3 days passed. She helped chop wood on the second, insisted on it. He watched her from the corner of his eye, the way she moved with quiet strength, her hands red with cold but her posture proud. On the third, she found his rifle sitting by the porch. "You fought in the war?" she asked, touching the worn stock. He nodded. 8th Missouri Cavalry. Lost my brother at Shiloh." She looked at him, really looked. "I lost my mother to fever. Then the man who raised me turned cruel." They stood there, two people shaped by loss, the wind between them. "You could stay here," he said after a long pause. "If you want." Beatrice's eyes were steady. "You barely know me." August took a breath. "I know what I saw. A woman brave enough to speak when everyone else stayed quiet. I know you did not break, even when they tried to bury you." She looked down. Her voice was soft. "I was scared. We all are," he said. "But you still spoke. That matters." That night, she cooked stew from what little he had in the pantry. They ate at the small table by the fire, their knees brushing under it. When she laughed a real, full laugh at something clumsy, he said he froze for a second, watching her. "You have not smiled since you got here," he said. "I forgot what it felt like," she replied. August reached across the table. His hand covered hers. Beatrice looked at him, eyes wide again, but not with fear this time. With something else. Hope. He did not kiss her then. Just held her hand. Let her feel safe. But something had shifted. Something new had begun. And in the quiet of that cabin, with the storm behind them and warmth between them, Beatrice Talley began to believe in her own voice again and the man who helped her find it. The wind had settled by morning, though the sky stayed low and gray, stretched thin over the hills like worn wool. Beatrice stood at the edge of the porch, arms crossed over her chest, watching a crow pick at something in the frost-stiff grass. The cabin sat quiet behind her. She didn't turn when August stepped out, just shifted slightly to make room beside her. He handed her a strip of jerky and leaned against the post. "Snow's coming." She nodded. "You always know the weather?" "Comes from sleeping under it long enough." Beatrice chewed slowly, the salt sharp on her tongue. "How long have you lived out here?" "Since the war ended," he said. "Didn't take to town life after. Noise didn't sit right. So I bought this land, cleared it myself. Took near 2 years to get the roof from leaking." She glanced at him, surprised. "You built the cabin?" "Every board." August didn't look proud, so much as resigned. "I still can't square a corner to save my life." She smiled faintly, then looked out again toward the trees. "I don't know what comes next." "You deciding to stay was enough for one day," he said. "The rest can wait." Beatrice didn't answer right away. Her fingers worked at the edge of her sleeve, nails worrying a loose thread. "I used to think if I just said the truth loud enough, people would listen. Some do," he said. "Some just don't want to." She turned to him then, her expression unreadable. "Why did you help me?" August met her gaze. "Because I've seen what happens when good people stay quiet." A gust of wind pulled at her skirt. When it passed, she looked down at the ring around her finger. "Simple brass. Dull from where?" "I was supposed to marry a boy from town," she said. "He changed his mind after I started speaking at the church meetings. Said he didn't want a wife with opinions." August didn't laugh, though the corner of his mouth twitched. "Then he wasn't worth the asking." "I thought I'd grow old there," she murmured. "Raise chickens. Teach some. Just live quiet." "You still can," he said. "Might not be the life you planned, but it can still be yours." Beatrice looked toward the tree line again. "I don't want to be afraid anymore." "You aren't," he said. "You're just still healing." Inside, the fire crackled low. August stepped back through the door and returned with oilskin and a bundle of rope. "I need to check the traps," he said. "You're welcome to come if you want." Her brows lifted. "Even if I slow you down, I'd rather have company than speed." She hesitated, then followed him down the steps. They walked the narrow path behind the cabin, boots crunching over frost. The air smelled of pine and old smoke. When they reached the first snare, a hare lay caught, its body still. August knelt, quiet and efficient, offering no apology for the death. Beatrice crouched beside him. "You always hunt." He nodded. "Only what I need. The rest I trade with a widow down in the valley. She's got goats. I can't stand the taste of goat's milk, but she swears by it." Beatrice's breath made little clouds in the cold. "Do you miss people?" "Sometimes," he said. "But I don't miss the kind that turn their heads when something's wrong." They followed the line of traps deeper into the trees. At the third one, a fox had gnawed the wire clean through. August frowned, crouched, and examined the bite marks. "Too smart for its own good," he muttered. "I'll have to reset this one." Beatrice leaned on a nearby birch, watching him work. "You ever think of leaving Montana?" "Once," he said. "Didn't get far. The place got into my bones." She nodded slowly. "It's wild country." His voice softened. "So are you." They paused there, wind moving through the branches above. Beatrice's eyes held his for a long moment before she looked away. "I haven't felt safe in years," she said. "I don't expect you to trust me," he said. "But I'll earn it, however long that takes." They walked back in silence, but it wasn't empty. It carried something new between them, unspoken, but real. The kind of quiet that didn't press or demand, but waited. Back at the cabin, Beatrice hung the hair from a hook and reached for the carving knife. August watched her without speaking, then turned to stoke the fire. Later, as dusk settled and the stew simmered, she sat across from him again. This time, when their knees touched, she didn't pull away. "Have you ever been in love?" she asked, not looking up. August stirred the pot. "Once. Before the war. She married someone else while I was gone." Beatrice nodded. "I never was." "Not really." He poured 2 bowls, slid one across to her. "Maybe we're both learning slow." She lifted her spoon. Slow doesn't mean never. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and steady. Inside, the cabin held steady warmth, and the space between them narrowed, not with urgency, but with something patient and growing. Neither of them said it aloud, but both knew. Whatever had started that night in the rain hadn't ended with shelter. It was still unfolding, quiet as snow, steady as breath. In the weeks that followed, the land turned pale with snow. It came slow at first, dusting the pines and pooling against the cabin's eaves, but by mid-December, it lay thick and heavy across the clearing, muting every sound but the low groan of trees under weight. Beatrice took to mornings with a rhythm splitting kindling, warming biscuits over the hearth, patching seams in her worn skirts while August carved replacement trapline steaks at the table. They spoke less often than one might expect of 2 people sharing such close quarters, but the quiet between them had grown comfortable, not empty. It was in the way she poured his coffee without asking how he took it, the way he left his gloves by the stove for her hands to warm. Each gesture filled space no words could. On the 14th morning, Beatrice found him out back, knee-deep in snow, hauling a fresh-cut spruce across the yard. "What's that for?" she called, brushing her braid over one shoulder. He looked up, cheeks ruddy from effort. "Little tradition I kept from my mother. Always brought a tree in come winter. She'd hang dried apples and thread buttons on string." Beatrice stepped closer, eyeing the tree's crooked top. "You planning to decorate it?" "I don't have much for trimming," he said, "but I figured it might make the place feel less like a shelter and more like a home." She hesitated, then reached for one end of the trunk. "Let's get it inside, then." They set it upright in a barrel packed with stones and snowmelt. Beatrice tied bits of cloth to the branches, while August strung a length of twine with tiny whittled animals he'd carved an elk, a crow, 2 horses mid-run. When dusk fell, the firelight flickered across the tree's rough decorations, casting shadows that danced on the walls. After supper, Beatrice lingered by the window, watching snow feather down through the dark. "You ever think about leaving here?" she asked. August leaned back in his chair. "Sometimes. But every time I try, I remember what it felt like to come back. Like breathing after holding too long." She turned from the window. "If you hadn't been passing by that night, you'd have found your way out," he said. "One way or another." She crossed the room, sat in the chair across from him. "I've been piecing together what I want now. Not just what I ran from. That's harder." August nodded. "You don't owe anyone a plan." "I've been thinking of writing again," she said. "Not letters. Not warnings. Just stories. Things I saw. Things I know." He looked at her then, eyes drawn and quiet. "You should." Beatrice picked at a thread on her cuff. "I want to believe the truth doesn't always have to come at a cost." "It doesn't," he said. "Not anymore. Not here." The next morning, she brought out a box from under her cot. Inside were scraps of paper, corners curled, ink faded. She began sorting them by the fire, her hands steady, eyes focused. August didn't ask what they were. He only brought her more paper when she ran out, and a jar of ink he'd found tucked behind a crate of nails. One night, as the wind curled around the cabin like a wolf's breath, she looked up from her writing. August had dozed off in the rocking chair, boots kicked off, blanket slipped low on his chest. His face in sleep lost its hardness. The lines softened to something almost boyish. She stood, moved quietly to his side, and placed her hand over his. His fingers twitched, then stilled under hers. He didn't wake, but his hand turned slightly, his palm opening to hold hers. The next day, she found a new shelf above the hearth, carved and sanded smooth. Her papers rested on it, stacked neat. "I thought they deserved a place," he said when she looked over. Her voice was soft. "So do I." That night, she didn't return to her cot across the room. She stood by the fire until the logs burned low, then turned to him. "Can I stay here?" she asked. August rose. "You don't need to ask." He took her hand, and they crossed the room together. He didn't rush her, didn't touch her beyond her fingers. They lay side by side beneath the quilt, not speaking. When he reached for her in the quiet, It was only to pull her close, his hand steady at her back. The snow fell through the night, blanketing the roof above them. Inside, breath by breath, warmth bloomed. By morning, the wind had stilled completely. By late December, the cold had settled deep, the kind that stiffened wood beams and cracked skin despite mittens and boiled lard. The creek behind the cabin froze through, and even the ravens grew quiet, their calls muffled by the snow-packed trees. Beatrice had taken to wearing August's extra flannel shirt over her dress, the sleeves rolled high so she could write without dragging cuffs. It smelled faintly of pine smoke and saddle leather, and though she never said it aloud, the weight of it calmed her. One morning, August returned from the ridge with a broad-shouldered man riding a sturdy paint horse beside him. The man wore a thick scarf and a short beard gone to gray. As they dismounted, August gave her a glance that said not to worry, though she'd already stepped back from the door, fingers tightening at her sides. "This is Elias," August said. "He checks the lines up near Whitehorn. Brought us word." Elias nodded, voice low. "A marshal came through town 2 days back. He's asking after a woman who vanished from a homestead south of the cattle yard." Beatrice didn't speak. Her face held still, but her eyes flicked toward August. "I didn't say a word," Elias added. "Folks figured she ran off to Fort Shaw, or maybe east with the preacher's son." August looked at her. "We've got time." Elias stayed long enough for stew and to mend the leather on his saddle horn. When he left, Beatrice stood at the window until his figure vanished into the trees. "So they're looking," she said, finally. He rubbed his hands by the stove. "They'll stop once they realize no one's talking." "I don't want to live hidden," she said. "I want to live right." "You already are." She crossed the room slowly, boots scuffing the floorboards. "I want to file a land claim. My own. There's a lot east of here flat, near the creek. I walked it last week." "That's Dawson's old parcel," he said. "He died 3 winters ago. No kin. I want to grow something," she said. "Not just get by." He gave a small nod. "It's good land. Soil takes slow, but it'll hold." She looked at him steadily. "Will you help me file it?" "I will. And come with me, when it's time." His answer was quiet. "If you'll have me." She didn't say anything more, just rested her hand on his chest, where his heartbeat thudded steady through his shirt. That night, she brought out the last of the dried berries, mashed them into flour, and baked a small round cake in the cast-iron pan. She handed him a slice with no ceremony. He took a bite, then blinked. "You trying to win me over?" "I already did." The next morning, they packed the sled with cured hides, the cake wrapped in cloth, and the land documents August had kept folded in an old ledger. They would ride to the nearest post office 2 valleys west, where the clerk knew August by name. Beatrice tied her scarf beneath her chin, her cheeks bright from the cold. As she climbed onto the sled bench beside him, she looked out toward the east ridge. "Do you think people can forget what made them run?" He didn't answer right away. "I think they stopped needing to remember it." The horses moved slow through the snow, hooves crunching a steady rhythm across crusted drifts. She leaned against him, not for warmth, but for balance, and he kept one gloved hand firm on the reins, the other resting atop her knee. They would file the claim. They would build. And nothing behind them, not the cellar, not the silence, not the cowardice of others, would follow them into the life they chose now, together. The trail to the post office took the better part of 2 days. They camped by a frozen stream the first night, the sled drawn up beside a thicket of juniper. August built the fire low and narrow to keep the heat close, and Beatrice boiled beans and salt pork in a dented tin pot, her hands red from the cold but steady. When they ate, she leaned slightly against his shoulder, exhaustion softening her edges, and he let his hand rest lightly at the small of her back. Neither of them said much. The sky above stretched wide and pale, stars sharp as needle points. By the second afternoon, they reached the base of the valley where the post road curved south. The clerk, a thin man with a limp and a fondness for boiled sweets, recognized August immediately and ushered them inside to thaw. The stove was burning hot and the windows fogged, and Beatrice shed her coat with a slow breath, jaw tight as she handed over the wrapped documents. The clerk eyed her with careful curiosity, but asked no questions. Once the land claim was filed, August purchased a bag of seed potatoes, a tin of molasses, and a bolt of thick muslin. Beatrice selected a small metal thimble from a shelf near the back and tucked it into her pocket without comment. They left before dusk, the sled heavier under the weight of what would become a home. It was mid-January before the first signs of thaw appeared, just a faint trickle under the ice-crusted creek and the sound of water shifting beneath snow. Beatrice marked the days in a small ledger, her handwriting neat, the ink faint near the end of the pen. August spent more time outside, measuring the distance between trees, marking posts with charcoal, and drawing rough lines in the snow that outlined what would become their house. She stood beside him one morning, arms wrapped tight against her ribs as he pointed toward the slope. "Root cellar'd go best in the shade," he said. "And if we cut west a bit, you'll have morning light through the kitchen." She turned her face toward the pale blue sky. "I want a room for writing. Just a small one. Then that's what we'll build." They worked side by side as the snow melted, clearing brush, hauling stone, digging footings with iron picks. August showed her how to brace the wall frame with rope and timber, and she taught him how to patch seams tight enough that wind wouldn't find its way through. They argued only once over whether to place the stove near the center or against the back wall, and she relented with a quiet roll of her eyes when he reminded her of the draft that came down from the east hill. By the time the first crocus pushed through the thawed earth, the house had walls. One evening, as they sat on the unfinished porch watching geese fly low over the creek, Beatrice tilted her head toward him. "Do you think they'll come looking again?" He shook his head. "No one's spoken your name in town since the marshal passed through. Elias says they gave up asking." She traced a line on her palm with her thumb. "Then I want to write about it. All of it. Not just what happened there, but what it took to leave. What it cost to keep going." "You should," he said. "There are women who'll need to hear it." She looked at him, her eyes steady and sure. "I don't think I could have done this alone." "You didn't have to," he said. Then added, softer, "You never will again." That night, she didn't return to the small bed in the corner of the cabin. She slipped beneath the quilt beside him, her hand resting over his chest where the rhythm of him lived slow, even, known. They planted in April. Potatoes, onions, beans, and a row of sunflowers she insisted on, though August raised a brow at the space they took. She wrote in the evenings, her hands smudged with soil, the ink dark against the page. August repaired the fence, traded pelts for nails, and built her a proper desk with a drawer that stuck when the air was damp. On the first rain of May, they married at the edge of the creek, just the two of them. She wore a dress she'd sewn from the muslin he'd bought, and he gave her a ring cut from old silver, shaped with a rasp and polished against river stone. They stood under a cottonwood tree, the bark damp and dark behind them, and spoke vows not from paper, but from memory and heart. Afterward, they returned to the house, and August carried her across the threshold, not as a jest, but as a promise. She laughed once, then kissed him slow, her fingers curled at his collar. The years that followed settled quiet and full. They added a barn, 2 rooms off the back, and a porch swing that creaked when the wind turned west. Her writing found its way to distant towns stitched into broadsheets, read aloud in meeting halls. She never signed her full name, but the initials were enough for those who knew what strength looked like. August taught a neighbor's son how to shape fence posts, and in the evenings, he read aloud from the books she kept stacked near the hearth. They did not speak often of the cellar or the silence that once followed her. But sometimes, when the nights lay still and the fire burned low, Beatrice would touch the scar that ran along her left wrist and press her face to August's chest, and he would hold her without words until she slept. They grew old by inches, not in sudden turns. With each season, the land bore more, and the house filled with the scent of bread, the clatter of tools, the soft scratch of pen on paper. And in that wide, wild place, where the wind once howled with sorrow, they built a life marked not by what they had escaped, but by everything they chose to keep each other most of all.